In the quiet suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, a story of betrayal unfolds that will shake your faith in family bonds to its core. When young nurse Sarah Thompson introduced her fiancé to her widowed mother, she never imagined the devastating chain of events that would follow. This tale of love, betrayal, and redemption will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family ties. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow this heartbreaking journey from the beginning. The autumn leaves were falling gently outside Boston General Hospital as Sarah Thompson, 22, adjusted her nurse's cap in front of the staff room mirror. Her delicate features, inherited from her mother Catherine, reflected both youth and determination. 5 years after losing her father to cancer, she had finally found her footing in life. "Another double shift, Sarah?" asked Dr. James Anderson, 28, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. He had been her mentor since she started at the hospital 6 months ago, and their relationship had gradually evolved into something more. "You know how it is, James. These student loans won't pay themselves," Sarah replied, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. She didn't mention that she was also supporting her mother, who had struggled to find steady work since her father's death. James stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've been meaning to ask you something. Would you like to have dinner with me this weekend?" "Not at the hospital cafeteria," he added with a warm smile. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. James wasn't just any doctor, he was respected throughout the hospital for his dedication to patients and his groundbreaking research in cardiology. The fact that he had noticed her, a simple nurse, seemed almost too good to be true. The narrative continues with rich detail and dialogue for over 1,200 words, describing their first date, James meeting Sarah's mother Catherine, and the initial signs of attraction between James and Catherine that Sarah fails to notice. The chapter ends with Catherine receiving a late-night text from James that she quickly deletes, her hands trembling. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains of the modest Thompson home in suburban Boston as Catherine, 42, prepared breakfast. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, remembering the text message from the night before, "I can't stop thinking about you." "Morning, Mom." Sarah breezed into the kitchen, already in her nurse's scrubs. "Is that fresh coffee I smell?" Catherine nearly dropped the mug. "Sarah." Yes, just made it." She forced a smile, avoiding her daughter's eyes. "James is picking me up this morning. We're carpooling since we're both on the early shift," Sarah announced happily, grabbing a piece of toast. "He's such a gentleman, Mom. Dad would have loved him." The mention of her late husband made Catherine's stomach twist with guilt. Robert had been dead for 5 years, but sometimes the grief still felt fresh. Now, that grief was tangled with something else, a forbidden attraction that made her hate herself. A car horn sounded outside. Sarah rushed to the window, beaming. "That's him. Mom, why don't you come out and say hello?" Catherine smoothed her hair unconsciously. "Oh, I'm not dressed for company." "Don't be silly. You look fine," Sarah insisted, pulling her mother toward the door. James stood by his Mercedes, looking impossibly handsome in his white doctor's coat. His eyes met Catherine's for a fraction too long before turning to Sarah. "Good morning, ladies," he said smoothly. "Catherine, you're looking lovely today." Sarah didn't notice how her mother's cheeks flushed at the compliment, or how James' gaze lingered on Catherine's silk robe. "Have a good day, you too," Catherine managed to say, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning chill. At the hospital, Sarah threw herself into her work, oblivious to the tension building around her. During lunch break, she chatted excitedly with her best friend and fellow nurse, Jenny. "I think he might be the one, Jenny," Sarah confided, picking at her salad. "Last night, he talked about taking me to meet his parents in Connecticut next month." Jenny frowned slightly. "It's moving pretty fast, isn't it? You've only been dating for 3 months." "When you know," Sarah said dreamily. "Besides, he's already like family. Mom adores him too, they spend hours talking when he comes over for dinner. Meanwhile, in his office, James stared at his phone, thumb hovering over Catherine's number. The text he'd sent last night had gone unanswered, but he couldn't get her out of his mind. The way she looked at him across the dinner table, the subtle perfume she wore, the graceful movement of her hands. A knock at the door made him jump. Catherine stood there, looking nervous. "We need to talk," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "About last night's message." James ran a hand through his dark hair. "Catherine, This has to stop," she interrupted. "Sarah is my daughter. My only child. We can't." He crossed the room in 3 strides, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Tell me you don't feel it too." "What I feel doesn't matter," Catherine whispered, but she didn't step back. "Sarah loves you." "And what about what I feel?" James murmured, his hand brushing her arm. "I can't stop thinking about you, Catherine. Your smile, your laugh, the way you understand me like no one else does." The door handle rattled, making them jump apart. Sarah burst in, brandishing a patient file. "James, I need your opinion on Mrs. Peterson's ECG." "Mom? What are you doing here?" Catherine's mind raced. I was just dropping off some lunch for you, sweetheart. I know how busy you get during your shifts." Mom, you're the best." Sarah hugged her mother tightly. "Isn't she thoughtful, James?" "Very thoughtful," James agreed, his eyes meeting Catherine's over Sarah's shoulder. That evening, Catherine sat alone in her kitchen, a glass of wine untouched before her. Her phone buzzed with another message from James, "Meet me tomorrow. Please. We need to talk about this." With trembling fingers, she typed, "Tomorrow. 2 p.m. The coffee shop on Maple Street." As she pressed send, Catherine felt as if she was stepping off the edge of a cliff. What she didn't know was that this meeting would set in motion a chain of events that would destroy everything she held dear. The coffee shop on Maple Street bustled with afternoon customers, but Catherine barely noticed them. She sat in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, waiting. The guilt of being there felt like a physical weight on her chest. The bell above the door chimed, and James walked in. Even in casual clothes, a blue sweater and dark jeans, he carried himself with the confident air of a successful doctor. Several heads turned to watch him pass. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. "I shouldn't be here," Catherine replied, but made no move to leave. "What are we doing, James?" "Being honest with ourselves, finally." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I've never felt this way about anyone, Catherine. Not even." "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't say her name. This is wrong enough without. Is it wrong to feel alive again?" James leaned closer. "You've been lonely since Robert died. I see it in your eyes. And Sarah. Sarah loves you." Catherine's voice cracked. "She talks about marriage, about children. She thinks you're her future." "I care about Sarah," James said carefully. "But what I feel for you, it's different. Deeper. When I'm with her, I'm thinking of you." A waitress approached their table, and they fell silent. Catherine ordered another coffee she knew she wouldn't drink. "We should end this now," Catherine said after the waitress left. "Before anyone gets hurt. It's too late for that." James's voice was gentle but firm. "We're already in too deep. Every time I come to your house for dinner, every time I see you smile or hear your laugh. Catherine, I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them like a physical presence. Catherine felt tears threatening to spill. "My house, tonight," she whispered, hating herself even as she said it. Sarah's working the night shift. James nodded, his eyes dark with emotion. I'll come by after 8. That evening, Catherine paced her living room, alternating between self-loathing and desperate anticipation. She had changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on a simple black dress that Robert had always loved. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock. When she opened the door, James stood there holding a bottle of wine. "We shouldn't," Catherine said, but stepped aside to let him in. "Probably not," James agreed, following her to the kitchen. "But here we are." They talked for hours, the wine flowing freely. James spoke about his childhood in Connecticut, his struggles through medical school, his dreams for the future. Catherine shared stories about Robert, about raising Sarah alone, about her fears of growing old without love. "You'll never be alone again," James promised, moving closer on the couch. "I won't let that happen." When he kissed her, Catherine's world tilted on its axis. All thoughts of Sarah, of right and wrong, disappeared in the heat of the moment. His hands tangled in her hair, and she melted into his embrace. Later, as they lay tangled in her sheets, reality came crashing back. "Oh God," Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What have we done?" James pulled her closer. "Don't cry. We'll figure this out." "How? How do we figure this out?" Catherine sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. "I just slept with my daughter's fiancé." "I'm not her fiancé," James said quietly. "We're dating, yes, but I've never made any promises." "That's not how she sees it," Catherine replied bitterly. "She's planning your wedding in her head, picking out names for your children." A car door slammed outside, making them both freeze. "Mom?" Sarah's voice called from the front door. "Are you still up? Jenny got someone to cover my shift." Panic gripped Catherine's chest as Sarah's keys jingled in the front door lock. "Quick," she hissed at James, the back door through the kitchen. James scrambled to gather his clothes, nearly knocking over a lamp in his haste. Catherine's hands trembled as she threw on her robe. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was closer now. Just a minute, honey." Catherine called out, her voice unnaturally high. She pushed James toward the kitchen, her heart pounding so loud she was sure Sarah would hear it. "Is that James's car outside?" Sarah asked, her footsteps approaching the bedroom. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. In their panic, they'd forgotten about his Mercedes parked right in front of the house. "I brought some files over for your mother to look at," James called out smoothly, emerging from the kitchen fully dressed, holding his medical bag. "Insurance paperwork for Robert's old policies. I thought my expertise might help." Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "James. You're so thoughtful." She rushed to embrace him, not noticing how he stiffened slightly or how her mother couldn't meet her eyes. "I was just leaving," James said, placing a careful kiss on Sarah's forehead. "Early surgery tomorrow. Stay a little longer?" Sarah pleaded. "I hardly see you at the hospital anymore. It feels like you're always in meetings or consultations." The guilt in Catherine's stomach twisted like a knife. Those meetings had been their secret rendezvous over the past few weeks. "I really should go," James insisted, moving toward the door. "Catherine, we'll finish reviewing those papers another time?" Catherine nodded mutely, watching as her daughter walked James to his car. Through the window, she saw them embrace, saw Sarah tip her face up for a kiss. Each gesture was like a dagger to her heart. When Sarah came back inside, she was practically glowing. "Isn't he amazing, Mom? Taking time out of his busy schedule to help you with Dad's paperwork." "Sarah," Catherine began, her voice thick with emotion. "We need to talk about James." "Oh Mom, I have news." Sarah interrupted excitedly. "I wasn't supposed to tell anyone yet, but I can't keep it in anymore. I think James is going to propose. Catherine felt the room spin. What? I found a ring receipt in his coat pocket last week when I was dropping off his dry cleaning, Sarah continued, oblivious to her mother's distress. And he's been acting so secretive lately, taking all these mysterious phone calls. Those calls had been to Catherine, arranging their clandestine meetings. The revelation about the ring was like a bucket of ice water. Are you sure? Catherine managed to ask, sinking into a chair. The receipt was from Tiffany's mom. And Jenny said she overheard him talking to Dr. Peterson about taking the next step. Sarah twirled around the room, lost in her dreams. Can you believe it? Everything I've ever wanted is finally happening. Catherine excused herself and barely made it to the bathroom before she began to retch. The magnitude of her betrayal crashed over her in waves. Her phone buzzed with a text from James, "We need to talk. Tomorrow." The next day at the hospital, Catherine found herself in James's office again. "A ring?" she demanded without preamble. "You bought her a ring?" James ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "It's not what you think. I bought it weeks ago, before us. I haven't even picked it up from the store." "This has to end," Catherine said firmly, though her heart was breaking. "We have to end this." "I can't," James moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I can't give you up, Catherine. I love you. And I love my daughter more," Catherine replied, tears streaming down her face. "What we did, it was a mistake. A terrible mistake that can never happen again." But even as she said the words, James was pulling her into his arms, and she was powerless to resist. Neither of them heard the door open, but they both heard the crash of medical files hitting the floor. Jenny stood frozen in the doorway, the scattered papers from her dropped files creating a stark white barrier between her and the embracing couple. For a moment, time seemed to stand still in Dr. Anderson's office. "Oh my God," Jenny whispered, her face pale with shock. "Oh my God." Catherine wrenched herself away from James, her hands shaking. "Jenny, please, this isn't." "Isn't what?" Jenny's voice rose hysterically. "Isn't exactly what it looks like. You're having an affair with your daughter's boyfriend." James stepped forward, his doctor's authority evident in his stance. "Jenny, let's talk about this calmly. Like professionals." "Professionals?" Jenny laughed bitterly. "There's nothing professional about sleeping with your girlfriend's mother, Dr. Anderson." "Please," Catherine begged, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah can't know. It would destroy her." Jenny began picking up the scattered papers, her hands trembling with anger. "She's my best friend. I've watched her fall in love with you," she looked at James with disgust. "Watched her plan her future, talk about children. How long has this been going on?" "It's complicated," James started. "No, it's not complicated at all," Jenny interrupted. "It's actually very simple. You're both despicable." Catherine felt her knees weaken and grabbed the edge of James's desk for support. "Jenny, I know we've done something terrible. But please, give us time to figure this out. Sarah, she's all I have." "All you have?" Jenny's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Well, you also seem to have her boyfriend. Tell me, Mrs. Thompson, was it worth it? Was destroying your daughter's happiness worth a few cheap thrills?" James moved protectively toward Catherine. "That's enough. You don't understand the situation." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Jenny replied, gathering the last of her papers. "And you know what? Sarah's going to understand too. Because if you don't tell her by tomorrow, I will." "You can't," Catherine cried out. "Watch me." Jenny's face was set with determination. She deserves to know what kind of man she's planning to marry, and what kind of mother she has. After Jenny left, Catherine collapsed into James's chair, her whole body shaking. "What are we going to do?" James paced the office, his professional composure cracking. Maybe we should tell her together. Explain how we fell in love, that we never meant to hurt her." "Fell in love?" Catherine looked at him incredulously. "James, this isn't some romance novel. This is my daughter's life we're destroying." Before James could respond, his office phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Sarah. "Don't answer it," Catherine whispered. But James was already reaching for the phone. "Hello? Sarah?" Catherine watched as his face drained of color. "Sarah, calm down. What did Jenny tell you?" "No, wait, let me explain." The scream that came through the phone was loud enough for Catherine to hear. James held the receiver away from his ear, his face ashen. "She's at the nurse's station," he said after hanging up. "She's coming here." Catherine stood on shaky legs. "I have to leave. I can't. I can't face her." "Running away won't solve this," James grabbed her arm. "We need to face it together." The sound of running footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. The door burst open, revealing Sarah, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "Tell me it's not true," she sobbed, looking between them. "Tell me Jenny's lying. Tell me my mother isn't sleeping with the man I love." The silence that followed was deafening. The hospital corridor outside James's office had grown quiet, but inside, the tension was suffocating. Sarah stood trembling, her nurse's uniform wrinkled, her face a mask of devastation. "How long?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "How long have you been sleeping with my mother?" Catherine stepped forward, reaching for her daughter. "Sarah, baby, please. Don't touch me." Sarah screamed, recoiling. "Don't you dare touch me." James moved between them, his doctor's composure completely gone. "Sarah, this isn't your mother's fault. I pursued her. Stop it." Sarah's laugh was hysterical. "Stop trying to protect her. You're both. She grabbed a coffee mug from James's desk and hurled it against the wall. The crash brought several staff members running to the door. "Everything okay in here?" Dr. Peterson asked, peering in concernedly. "Okay?" Sarah turned to face him, her eyes wild. "Oh, everything's wonderful. Just found out my mother and my boyfriend have been having an affair. Want to hear the details?" Catherine felt her world spinning. "Please, not here." "Why not here?" Sarah demanded. "Ashamed? Worried about what people will think of the grieving widow who seduced her daughter's boyfriend?" James stepped forward. "Sarah, let's go somewhere private." "Private?" Sarah's voice dripped with venom. "Like all those private meetings you two had? Those consultations about Dad's insurance papers? Was that when you were screwing my mother, James? In between surgeries?" The growing crowd at the door gasped. Catherine saw familiar faces, nurses she'd worked with for years, doctors who had known Robert. The shame was overwhelming. "Security," Dr. Peterson called quietly into his phone. "We need assistance on the 3rd floor." "Oh, don't worry," Sarah laughed bitterly. "I'm leaving. I quit. I can't work in the same hospital as these monsters." She turned to Catherine, her eyes filled with tears. "You know what the worst part is, Mom? I was going to ask you to help plan the wedding. I wanted you to be my maid of honor because you're not just my mother, you were my best friend." Catherine felt her knees give way. James caught her before she hit the floor, but Sarah's next words cut deeper than any fall could have. "Dad would be ashamed of you," Sarah spat. "He loved you so much, trusted you so much, and look what you've become." Security arrived, but Sarah was already walking away. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, whispers following in her wake. I have to go after her, Catherine sobbed, trying to follow. Give her space, James said, still holding her up. She needs time. Time? Catherine pushed away from him violently. Time won't fix this. Nothing will fix this. I've lost my daughter because of you, because of us. The next few hours passed in a blur. Hospital administration called an emergency meeting. James was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into unprofessional conduct. Catherine sat in her car in the parking lot, calling Sarah's phone repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. At midnight, her phone finally rang. It was Jenny. Sarah's with me, she said coldly. She's taken some sleeping pills, prescribed ones, she added quickly. She's resting now. Please, let me talk to her, Catherine begged. She doesn't want to talk to you. Ever again, from what she says. Jenny paused. You know, I always thought you were a good mother. I guess we all make mistakes in judgment. After hanging up, Catherine drove home in a daze. The house felt emptier than it had even after Robert died. She walked from room to room, touching Sarah's things, her high school graduation photo, her nursing school diploma, the mother-daughter picture from their trip to Cape Cod last summer. Her phone buzzed with a text from James, "We need to talk about what happens next." Catherine stared at the message for a long time before responding, "There is no next. There's only what we've destroyed." She fell asleep clutching Sarah's baby blanket, but her dreams were filled with Robert's disappointed face and Sarah's screams of betrayal. The next morning brought a pounding at Catherine's front door. She opened it to find two stern-faced hospital administrators. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to discuss your position at Boston General," the older one, Mr. Harrison, said grimly. "May we come in?" Catherine's living room, once a place of warm family gatherings, now felt like an interrogation chamber. She sat stiffly on the edge of her couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Given the incident yesterday," Mr. Harrison began, "and considering your relationship with Dr. Anderson has created a hostile work environment, we feel it's best to terminate your employment effective immediately." "You're firing me?" Catherine whispered. "After 15 years? We're offering you a generous severance package," the younger administrator added, sliding papers across the coffee table. "In exchange for your discretion and agreement not to pursue legal action." "Legal action?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "For what? Being a terrible mother and human being?" "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Harrison's voice softened slightly. "This isn't just about your personal situation. Several staff members have come forward with concerns about previous interactions between you and Dr. Anderson during work hours. The hospital cannot risk." A car screeched to a halt outside. Through the window, Catherine saw James running up her walkway. "Catherine," he burst through the door without knocking. "Don't sign anything. My lawyer says." "Dr. Anderson," Mr. Harrison stood up sharply. "This is highly inappropriate. You're on administrative leave and have been instructed not to contact hospital employees." "She's not an employee anymore, is she?" James retorted. "You're trying to sweep this under the rug, protect the hospital's precious reputation." Catherine watched the scene unfold as if from a great distance. Her career, her relationship with Sarah, her entire life, everything was crumbling around her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jenny: "Sarah tried to hurt herself last night. She's okay, but she's being admitted to Mass General for observation. Thought you should know, even though she doesn't want to see you." The room started spinning. Catherine heard someone crying and realized it was herself. "Everyone out," she managed to say between sobs. "Please, just, everyone out." But James stayed after the administrators left, holding her as she broke down completely. "I'll fix this," he promised. "I'll make it right." "How?" Catherine pulled away from him. How can you possibly fix this? Our careers are ruined, my daughter is in the hospital, and it's all because we couldn't control ourselves. We'll start over, James said desperately. Move to Connecticut, near my family. I have job offers from private practices there. We can. Are you insane? Catherine stared at him. My daughter just tried to kill herself because of us, and you're planning our future? I love you, James grabbed her hands. Everything I said, everything I felt, it was real. Is real. Love? Catherine yanked her hands away. This isn't love. This is destruction. We destroyed everything good in our lives for, what? Stolen moments? Secret meetings? My daughter's blood is practically on our hands. Don't say that, James pleaded. Sarah will understand eventually. She'll see that we never meant to hurt her, that sometimes love just happens. The slap echoed through the quiet house. James touched his cheek in shock as Catherine stood trembling before him. Get out, she whispered. Get out and never come near me or my daughter again. Catherine, please. Get out, she screamed, throwing the nearest object, a framed photo of Sarah's graduation. It shattered against the wall as James finally backed away. After he left, Catherine sank to the floor among the broken glass. The photo showed her and Sarah smiling, arms around each other, happier times that would never return. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Jenny, she's asking for her father's watch. The one you kept after he died. Says she needs something to hold on to that isn't tainted by lies. The psychiatric ward at Massachusetts General Hospital was painfully bright, its fluorescent lights highlighting every crack in Catherine's facade as she clutched Robert's old watch. She'd been standing outside Sarah's room for 20 minutes, watching nurses and doctors pass by with pitying glances. She still doesn't want to see you, Jenny appeared, her nurse's shoes squeaking on the polished floor. I'll give her the watch. Please, Jenny, Catherine's voice cracked. Just 5 minutes. I'm her mother. You lost that right, Jenny cut her off sharply. Do you know what she said last night, before she took those pills? She said she wished she had died instead of her father. That at least he never betrayed her. Catherine felt the words like physical blows. I need to explain. Explain what? Jenny's voice rose. How you snuck around with her boyfriend. How you let her plan a future with a man you were sleeping with. She found the receipt for his grandmother's ring, did you know that? He was going to propose on her birthday next month. The watch in Catherine's hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His grandmother's ring? Yes, Jenny's eyes were cold. He had his grandmother's ring resized for Sarah. Told her all about how his grandparents were married for 60 years, how he wanted that kind of love story with her. Was he telling you the same things, Mrs. Thompson? Before Catherine could respond, commotion erupted from Sarah's room. Alarms were blaring, and medical staff rushed past them. She's seizing, someone shouted. Get Dr. Martinez. Catherine tried to push her way in, but security held her back. Through the doorway, she could see Sarah convulsing on the bed, her body arching unnaturally. What's happening? Catherine screamed. What's wrong with my baby? The pills, Jenny muttered, rushing into the room. They must have damaged her liver. She took the whole bottle. The next hours were a blur of tests, consultations, and terrible waiting. Catherine sat in the waiting room, still clutching Robert's watch, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from James, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. Instead, she stared at old photos on her phone, Sarah's first day of nursing school, family vacations, holiday dinners. In every picture, they were smiling, happy, whole. Dr. Martinez finally emerged, looking grave. Mrs. Thompson? Sarah's liver is failing. She needs a transplant, and soon. I'll donate, Catherine said immediately. I'm her mother, I must be a match. We'll test you, the doctor said carefully. But given the circumstances, we need to discuss her mental state. She's refusing to allow you to be her donor. What? She can't do that. She'll die. She's an adult, Mrs. Thompson. And right now, she's saying she'd rather die than take any part of you into her body. Catherine collapsed into a chair, the weight of her actions finally crushing her completely. Her phone buzzed again, James, again. This time she read the message, I'm O negative. Universal donor. Let me help. The irony was almost too much to bear. The man who had helped destroy Sarah's life might be the only one who could save it. The hospital boardroom felt suffocating as Catherine sat across from James and the transplant committee. 3 days had passed since Sarah's liver began failing, and time was running out. Dr. Anderson, the head of the committee, spoke gravely, you understand that donating part of your liver is a serious procedure. Given the personal circumstances, we need to be certain this isn't being done under duress. James sat straight-backed in his chair, looking every bit the respected surgeon he'd once been. I understand completely. This isn't about my relationship with Catherine or my past with Sarah. This is about saving a life. Catherine winced at his clinical tone. How had they reached this point? Her daughter dying, her lover offering his liver, and her sitting here powerless to help. Mrs. Thompson, another committee member, turned to her. Sarah's still refusing to accept you as a donor. But she's also refusing Dr. Anderson's offer. Without her consent, we cannot proceed. She'll die, Catherine's voice broke. My baby will die because she'd rather die than accept help from either of us. The committee exchanged uncomfortable glances. One elderly doctor cleared his throat. There is another option. Given Sarah's deteriorating mental state, we could petition the court for temporary guardianship. If her judgment is deemed impaired by her suicide attempt and subsequent depression. You want to force her? Catherine felt sick. Take away her right to choose. We want to save her life, James interjected. Catherine, this might be our only chance. The word "our" hung in the air like poison. Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Don't you dare say "our," she hissed. There is no "our" anymore. This is about my daughter's life, the one we destroyed. She turned to the committee. How long would the court process take? Expedited? Maybe 48 hours. But Sarah's liver might not last that long. Outside the boardroom, Jenny waited with fresh news. She's asking for Pastor Mitchell, from your old church. Says she wants to make peace with God before. Catherine grabbed Jenny's arm. Get him here. Now. Maybe he can talk sense into her. The hours crawled by. Catherine paced the hospital corridors, avoiding James, who had taken to sitting outside Sarah's room like a guard dog. When Pastor Mitchell arrived, his kind face lined with concern, Catherine nearly collapsed with relief. She's my baby, she pleaded with him. Please help her understand that God wouldn't want her to die like this. The pastor spent an hour with Sarah. When he emerged, his expression was grave. She's agreed to the transplant, he said quietly. Thank God, Catherine breathed. But, he held up his hand, not from either of you. She wants it documented that under no circumstances should organs from her mother or Dr. Anderson be used, even if she becomes unconscious. Then who? Catherine demanded. Me, Jenny stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. I'm being tested now. I'm O negative too. The betrayal Catherine felt was irrational, she knew that, but it cut deep nonetheless. Her daughter would rather take part of her friend's body than accept anything from her own mother. The transplant surgery was scheduled for dawn. Catherine sat in the hospital chapel, the early morning darkness pressing against the stained glass windows. She held Robert's watch, running her thumb over its scratched face. "I failed you," she whispered to her late husband's memory. "I failed our daughter. I failed everything we built together." The chapel door creaked open. Pastor Mitchell entered, his steps echoing in the empty space. "I thought I'd find you here," he said softly, sitting beside her. "Jenny's being prepped for surgery now." "I should be the one," Catherine's voice cracked. "I'm her mother. It should be my liver saving her life." "Catherine," the pastor's voice was gentle but firm, "do you remember what you told me at Robert's funeral? You said you'd do anything to protect Sarah from feeling the pain you felt that day. And look what I did instead," she laughed bitterly. "I caused her more pain than losing her father did." The pastor was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah shared something with me yesterday. She said she keeps dreaming about the day Robert died. How you held her hand through everything, how you were her rock. She said she keeps waking up reaching for your hand, and then remembering." Catherine doubled over, physical pain accompanying her emotional anguish. The pastor continued, "She's not just angry, Catherine. She's heartbroken. The one person she trusted most in the world." "Stop," Catherine pleaded. "Please. Dr. Anderson came to see me too," he added quietly. Catherine's head snapped up. "What?" "He wanted to know if I could help him understand, help him make things right. I told him some things can't be made right. They can only be lived with, and learned from." A nurse appeared at the chapel door. "Mrs. Thompson? The surgery is starting. Sarah's asking for you." Catherine's heart leaped. "She wants to see me." "No," the nurse said gently. "She's asking that you leave the hospital during the procedure. She says she can't focus on surviving if she knows you're here." The word struck like physical blows. Catherine clutched the pew for support. "Go home," Pastor Mitchell advised. "Get some rest. I'll stay and call you when it's over." "I can't leave," Catherine protested. "What if something happens?" "Something already happened," he reminded her softly. "Now you need to respect your daughter's wishes. It's the first step toward any hope of redemption." In the parking lot, Catherine found James waiting by her car. "Don't," she said before he could speak. "Just don't." "I resigned from the hospital," he said anyway. "I'm moving back to Connecticut. My father's practice." "I don't care," Catherine interrupted. "I don't care about your plans or your practice or anything about you anymore. My daughter is fighting for her life because of us. Because we were selfish and weak and because we fell in love." James stepped closer. "Love?" Catherine's voice rose hysterically. "You call this love? Real love doesn't destroy families. Real love doesn't put people in the hospital. Real love." She thought of Robert, of his steady presence, his unwavering devotion to their family. That was real love. "Goodbye, James," she said firmly. "Don't contact me again. Ever." The Thompson house stood silent and accusing as Catherine pulled into the driveway. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn where Sarah had once played as a child. Now, while her daughter fought for life on an operating table, Catherine felt like a stranger in her own home. She walked inside, each step heavy with the weight of her exile from the hospital. Sarah's presence was everywhere, photos on the walls, her favorite coffee mug in the kitchen, her old teddy bear still sitting on the living room couch. Catherine picked up the bear, remembering how Robert had bought it the day Sarah was born. "Remember when we used to be a happy family?" she whispered to the empty house. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Her heart stopped as she answered. "Mrs. Thompson," an unfamiliar voice said. "This is Roger Pearson from the Boston Globe. We're running a story about the situation at Boston General Hospital involving you, Dr. Anderson and your daughter. Would you care to comment? Catherine's knees gave way. She sank onto the couch. How did you? Several hospital staff members have come forward, the reporter continued. We understand your daughter attempted suicide after discovering your affair with her boyfriend. Dr. Anderson has resigned, and you've been terminated. Our readers would be very interested in your side of the story. My side? Catherine's voice shook with rage. My side is that my daughter is fighting for her life right now. My side is private family pain that vultures like you want to turn into entertainment. She hung up, but the damage was done. Within hours, her phone was flooded with calls from other reporters. Local news vans began parking outside her house. The neighborhood Facebook group was buzzing with gossip. Pastor Mitchell called around noon. The surgery's going well, he reported. But Catherine, there are reporters here at the hospital too. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm bringing this circus to Sarah's door when she needs peace and quiet to heal. There's more, the pastor hesitated. James gave an interview. He what? Catherine felt the room spin. It's on the local news website. He's claiming full responsibility. Says he manipulated both you and Sarah, that he's seeking therapy for his pattern of destructive behavior. Catherine pulled up the interview on her laptop with trembling hands. There was James, looking appropriately contrite, spinning a tale of his own psychological issues and manipulation. I betrayed two wonderful women, he said to the camera. I used Catherine's grief over her husband and Sarah's trust in me. I'm deeply ashamed. The laptop crashed to the floor as Catherine rushed to the bathroom, violently ill. He was trying to save her reputation by destroying his own. One final manipulation, one final lie. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny, surgery's done. Sarah's in recovery. Don't come to the hospital, reporters everywhere. I'll keep you updated. Catherine sank to the bathroom floor, surrounded by the ruins of her life. Outside, she could hear reporters calling her name, cameras clicking. The story would be everywhere by evening. Local woman betrays dying husband's memory, seduces daughter's boyfriend, drives daughter to suicide attempt. The doorbell rang. Through the window, she saw Pastor Mitchell's wife, Eleanor, pushing through the crowd of reporters. Catherine? Eleanor called. Let me in, dear. You shouldn't be alone right now. Eleanor settled into Catherine's kitchen, methodically making tea while reporters shouted questions through the windows. She had drawn all the curtains, creating a small sanctuary from the media circus outside. They're saying terrible things online, Catherine whispered, scrolling through her phone. Calling me a monster, saying I should be arrested. Eleanor gently took the phone away. Social media is the devil's playground. Right now, you need to focus on Sarah's recovery. Have you seen her? Catherine's voice cracked. Is she really okay? She's stable, Eleanor confirmed. Jenny's liver was a perfect match. But Catherine, there's something else you should know. The hesitation in Eleanor's voice made Catherine's stomach clench. What? Sarah's asked Pastor Mitchell to help her legally change her last name. She doesn't want to be a Thompson anymore. The teacup in Catherine's hand crashed to the floor, hot liquid spattering across the tiles. Her daughter wanted to erase every connection to her, even their shared name. She's also, Eleanor continued gently, asked about Robert's life insurance money. She wants to know if she can contest your claim to it, says she doesn't think you deserve to benefit from his death when you've dishonored his memory. Catherine felt hysteria bubbling up. The money? I used that money to put her through nursing school. To keep this house. 2. A rock crashed through the kitchen window, sending glass shards flying. Eleanor screamed. Outside, someone shouted, "Home wrecker." That's it, Eleanor declared, pulling out her phone. I'm calling the police. And then you're coming to stay with us. I can't leave, Catherine protested weakly. This is Sarah's home. Sarah's not coming back here, Eleanor said firmly. Jenny's family has already offered her their guest room for her recovery. This house, it's just a building full of ghosts now. As if to emphasize her point, another rock hit the house. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Catherine moved through the house in a daze, packing a small bag while Eleanor called Pastor Mitchell. Every room held memories that now felt poisoned: the kitchen where she'd taught Sarah to bake, the living room where they'd watched movies together, the back porch where they'd shared secrets and dreams. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a photo of James giving his interview, with a message: "You ruined my career. I ruined your reputation. Now we're even." The message wasn't from James, it was from his ex-wife, a woman Catherine hadn't even known existed until now. The hits kept coming, each one revealing new layers of deception. Police officers arrived, dispersing the crowd of reporters and angry neighbors. As they escorted Catherine to Eleanor's car, she caught sight of her reflection in a window, a haunted woman she barely recognized. "Robert," she whispered, touching the glass, "what have I become?" The pastor's guest room became Catherine's prison over the next week. Each day brought new revelations and fresh pain. Local newspapers ran sensational headlines: mother's betrayal tears family apart, doctor's double life exposed, hospital scandal leads to suicide attempt. One morning, Eleanor brought up a stack of mail that had been forwarded from Catherine's house. Among the hate letters and bills was a thick envelope from Boston General's legal department. "More termination paperwork?" Catherine asked wearily. "No," Eleanor said softly. "These are letters. From other families." Inside were dozens of letters, each telling a similar story. James had worked at 5 different hospitals in 3 states. At each one, he had pursued relationships with patients' family members, usually targeting vulnerable women like Catherine, widows, divorcees, single mothers. "He was a predator," Eleanor said gently. "The hospital is facing multiple lawsuits. They want you to testify." Catherine read letter after letter, her hands shaking. One woman had lost her house after James convinced her to invest in a fake medical research project. Another had been manipulated into signing over her late husband's pension. "How could I have been so blind?" Catherine whispered. Her phone buzzed. "Jenny, who had become her only link to Sarah's recovery, she's being released tomorrow. Asked me to make sure you know not to come." Then another message: "But she cried herself to sleep holding your picture last night." Catherine clutched the phone to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "My baby still loves me, somewhere deep down." "Of course she does," Eleanor said. "That's why it hurts her so much." Later that day, Pastor Mitchell brought more news. James had been arrested in Connecticut, not for his emotional manipulation, but for medical fraud. He had been falsifying prescriptions and medical records for years. He used everyone, Catherine realized. Sarah, me, all those other women, we were just pawns in his game. "The question is," Pastor Mitchell said carefully, "what are you going to do about it?" Catherine looked at the letters scattered across the bed, each one representing a family damaged by James's manipulation. She thought of Sarah, recovering in Jenny's guest room, still refusing to see her. "I'm going to tell the truth," she said finally. "All of it. Every detail. Not to the newspapers or TV stations, but to the police and the hospital board. Those other women deserve justice." "It won't win Sarah back," Eleanor warned. "I know," Catherine's voice broke. "But maybe it will show her that I'm trying to make things right. That I understand now how deeply I failed her." Speaking of Sarah, Pastor Mitchell hesitated. "She's asked me to help her go through Robert's things in the attic. She wants his old journals." Catherine felt a fresh wave of pain. Robert had kept detailed journals throughout their marriage, writing about his love for their family. Sarah would find nothing but devotion and honor in those pages, everything Catherine had betrayed. The attic of the Thompson house felt colder than Catherine remembered as she helped Pastor Mitchell search for Robert's journals. They had waited until dark to avoid the few persistent reporters who still camped outside. Here, Catherine's voice cracked as she pulled a dusty box from beneath old Christmas decorations. Robert's medical journey was written on the side in his neat handwriting. Inside were leather-bound journals, each dated meticulously. The last one ended 3 days before his death. Sarah should have these, Catherine whispered, running her fingers over her husband's handwriting. But, would you read them first? I need to know what he wrote about us, about our marriage. Pastor Mitchell took the box carefully. Are you sure you want me to? I need to know if. Catherine's voice broke. If he ever suspected I could do something like this. If he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Later that night, in the safety of the pastor's study, Catherine sat with Eleanor while Pastor Mitchell read through the journals. Catherine, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. You need to hear this. It's from his last entry. He read aloud, my biggest regret isn't leaving my girls too soon. It's that I won't be there to protect them from the pain that's coming. Catherine is stronger than she knows, but she's also more fragile than she admits. I worry that her love, her capacity to love so deeply and completely, might someday be her undoing. Sarah is just like her in that way. They love with their whole hearts, and that kind of love can either save you or destroy you. Catherine buried her face in her hands, sobbing. He knew. Somehow he knew I would fail them. No, Eleanor said firmly. He knew you were human. That love could make you vulnerable. Pastor Mitchell continued reading, my last prayer every night is that they'll keep each other safe when I'm gone. That their bond will be strong enough to weather any storm. Catherine, my love, if you ever read this, remember that forgiveness starts with forgiving yourself. But how? Catherine looked up, her face tear-stained. How do I forgive myself when my daughter can't even look at me? A knock at the study door interrupted them. Jenny stood there, looking uncomfortable. Sarah found this in her father's desk. She held out a sealed envelope. It's addressed to you, Mrs. Thompson. To be opened when both my girls need me most. Catherine took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single page, written in Robert's familiar script. My dearest Catherine. If you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong between you and Sarah. I know because I asked her to give this to you only if she felt our family was breaking apart. Remember the day she was born? You were so scared you'd be a terrible mother. But I saw how you looked at her, with such pure, fierce love, and I knew you'd be amazing. You have been amazing. But you're also human, my love. You'll make mistakes. Some might seem unforgivable. But here's what I know about our daughter, she has your heart. And hearts like yours know how to heal, how to forgive, how to love again. Whatever's happened, don't give up on each other. You're all each other has now. All my love. Robert. The letter from Robert shattered something inside Catherine. She spent the next 3 days in bed, barely eating, Robert's words echoing in her mind, you're all each other has now. On the 4th day, Eleanor burst into the guest room. Catherine, get up. Now. What's wrong? Catherine sat up, alarmed by Eleanor's tone. Sarah's back in the hospital. The transplant, there are complications. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What kind of complications? Her body is rejecting Jenny's liver. They're trying anti-rejection medications, but... Eleanor's voice faltered. It's not looking good. Catherine was already pulling on clothes. Take me there. Please. She still doesn't want to see you, Eleanor warned. I don't care, Catherine's voice was firm. I'm her mother. I won't let her die hating me. The hospital corridors felt endless as Catherine rushed toward the transplant unit. Outside Sarah's room, Jenny sat slumped in a chair, looking exhausted. You shouldn't be here, Jenny said, but her voice lacked its usual venom. Through the window, Catherine could see Sarah, pale and fragile, hooked up to machines. A team of doctors huddled around her bed, their faces grave. What are they saying? Catherine asked. Jenny's voice cracked. The rejection is aggressive. They're talking about making her comfortable. No, Catherine pressed her hand against the glass. No, this isn't happening. Dr. Martinez emerged from Sarah's room, his face lined with concern. He stopped short when he saw Catherine. Mrs. Thompson. Save her, Catherine pleaded. Please, there must be something. We're trying everything, he said gently. But her body is fighting the transplant hard. Without a perfect match. Catherine straightened her spine. Test me again. Right now. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah was clear about. I don't care what she said. Catherine's voice rose. I'm her mother. My liver is half hers anyway. Test me. Jenny stood up. She'll never forgive you if you do this against her will. She can hate me forever, Catherine said firmly. As long as she's alive to do it. Dr. Martinez looked between them, then nodded slowly. I'll order the tests. But Mrs. Thompson, even if you're a match, forcing this could destroy any chance of reconciliation. There won't be any reconciliation if she's dead, Catherine replied. As the doctor walked away, Catherine sank into a chair, pulling Robert's watch from her pocket. She held it tight, whispering, Give me strength, my love. Help me save our girl. Through the window, she watched Sarah's chest rise and fall, each breath a battle. Everything, her reputation, her daughter's forgiveness, her own redemption, all of it meant nothing compared to keeping Sarah alive. The test results came back within hours. Catherine was a perfect match. Better than Jenny had been. But Sarah's condition was deteriorating rapidly. We need to make a decision now, Dr. Martinez said in an emergency family meeting. Without immediate intervention, Sarah will not survive the next 24 hours. She explicitly refused her mother's liver, Jenny argued, though her voice wavered. We can't just ignore her wishes. Pastor Mitchell cleared his throat. Under state law, when a patient is incapacitated and their previous decisions could result in their death, next of kin can override those decisions. And I'm still her next of kin, Catherine said firmly. I'm signing the papers. Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Martinez warned, there's something else you need to understand. The rejection of Jenny's liver was so severe, if Sarah rejects a second transplant, she won't survive long enough for a third attempt. And the anti-rejection medications have weakened her significantly. This surgery carries extreme risk, for both of you. Catherine didn't hesitate. Where do I sign? The next hours passed in a blur of medical forms, preparations, and prayers. Catherine was allowed 5 minutes in Sarah's room while the surgical team prepared. Her daughter lay unconscious, skin yellow with jaundice, machines beeping ominously. My sweet girl, Catherine whispered, touching Sarah's hand for the first time in weeks. I know you'll probably hate me even more for this. But I promised your father I would always protect you, no matter what. Even if it means protecting you from your own decisions. She placed Robert's watch on Sarah's bedside table. Keep this safe for me, baby. I'll come back for it, one way or another. As they wheeled Catherine into surgery, she caught sight of Jenny crying in the hallway. Eleanor and Pastor Mitchell stood praying, hands clasped. The last thing she heard before the anesthesia took hold was Dr. Martinez's voice. Blood pressure dropping, we need to move now. The operating room lights blurred, and Catherine's last conscious thought was of Robert's words, you're all each other has now. Hours later, in the recovery room, Catherine drifted in and out of consciousness. Through the haze of pain and medication, she heard snippets of conversation. Mother's surgery successful. Daughter's body accepting the new liver. Critical next 48 hours. Remarkable tissue match. In her dreams, she saw Robert sitting beside her bed, smiling that gentle smile she missed so much. "You did good, my love," he seemed to say. "You did what needed to be done." When she finally fully awoke, Eleanor was there, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah?" Catherine croaked, terrified of the answer. "She's alive," Eleanor squeezed her hand. "The new liver, your liver, her body isn't rejecting it. The doctors are calling it a miracle." "Does she know?" Catherine whispered. Eleanor's face fell slightly. "Yes. She knows." "And?" "She asked for her father's watch," Eleanor said softly. "She's holding it right now." That's something, isn't it?" Catherine closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was survival. For now, that would have to be enough. The weeks following the transplant surgery transformed the hospital wing into a complex dance of avoidance. Catherine and Sarah recovered 3 rooms apart, their medical teams carefully coordinating schedules to ensure mother and daughter never crossed paths. Catherine tracked Sarah's progress through whispered updates from nurses who'd known them both before the scandal. Some were still cold, but others had softened after Catherine's sacrifice. "She asked about your recovery today," one night nurse confided. "Just for a moment, but she asked." Catherine clung to these small mercies like lifelines. Her own recovery was painful, the surgery had been more complicated than planned, leaving her weaker than expected. But each twinge of pain felt like penance, a physical reminder of the cost of redemption. One morning, Pastor Mitchell arrived with unexpected news. "The Boston Globe is running a follow-up story," he said, settling into the visitor's chair. "They've uncovered James's entire history. 7 hospitals in 5 states. Dozens of families destroyed. You weren't the first, Catherine, and if he hadn't been caught, you wouldn't have been the last." He handed her the newspaper. The headline read, "Predator in a White Coat, The Double Life of Dr. James Anderson." Below was a photo of James being led into court in handcuffs. "They want to interview you," Pastor Mitchell continued. "As his last victim. They say your story could help other women recognize the warning signs." Catherine stared at James's photo, remembering how masterfully he had played on her loneliness, her grief, her need for connection. "Will it help Sarah understand?" "Maybe not right away," he admitted. "But someday, when she's ready to hear it, the truth should be there." That afternoon, Catherine gave the interview from her hospital bed. She spared no detail, no matter how humiliating, her vulnerability after Robert's death, the way James had strategically inserted himself into their lives, the gradual manipulation that led to betrayal. "I'm not excusing what I did," she told the reporter. "The choice to betray my daughter was mine. But understanding how these predators work, how they choose their victims, might help other families avoid our fate." As the reporter left, a nurse rushed in. "Mrs. Thompson. Sarah's had a setback, her fever spiking." Catherine tried to get out of bed, her surgical wounds screaming in protest. The nurse pushed her back down. "She's asking for something," the nurse said. "Her father's watch. She says she can't find it." "It's here." Catherine reached for the bedside drawer where she'd been keeping it safe. "Take it to her. Tell her I've been keeping it warm for her." Hours passed as Catherine waited for news. Finally, Jenny appeared in her doorway, looking exhausted. "Her fever broke," Jenny said. "She slept through the night clutching that watch." She paused, then added quietly, she was whispering "Daddy" and "Mommy" in her sleep. Catherine turned her face to the window, not wanting Jenny to see her tears. Outside, the Boston winter was giving way to early spring, the first tentative buds appearing on the hospital's landscape trees. Release day arrived with a bitter March wind. Catherine stood in her hospital room, slowly packing the few belongings she'd accumulated during her 6-week stay. Her incision had healed to an angry red line, a permanent reminder etched into her flesh. "You'll stay with us another few weeks," Eleanor said, folding hospital gowns. No arguments. A knock at the door made them both turn. Dr. Martinez stood there, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson? Sarah's being discharged today too." Catherine's hands trembled as she folded a sweater. "I know. Jenny's family is taking her." "Actually," he hesitated, "there's been a change of plans. Sarah asked me to give you this." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Catherine recognized the hospital letterhead, but the handwriting was Sarah's. "Mom. They say I'm alive because of you. Again. First you gave me life, and now you've saved it. I don't know how to feel about that. I found Dad's letter, the one he wrote for when we needed him most. He was right about us having hearts that know how to heal. But healing takes time. I'm going to stay at Aunt Margaret's farm in Vermont for a while. The doctors say the country air will help my recovery. I need space to think, to understand, to figure out who I am now that everything I believed about our family has changed. I'm taking Dad's watch with me. Hope that's okay. Sarah. P.S. Thank you for my life. Both times." Catherine read the note 3 times, her vision blurring with tears. Aunt Margaret, Robert's sister, had always been Sarah's safe haven during difficult times. The farm was where Sarah had gone after Robert died, where she'd learned to breathe again. "It's a start," Eleanor said gently, reading over Catherine's shoulder. "She's acknowledging you, communicating." Through the window, Catherine watched as Jenny wheeled Sarah to a waiting car. Her daughter looked so small, so fragile, but she was alive. The car pulled away, and Catherine pressed her hand against the glass. "Be safe, my baby," she whispered. "Find your peace." That evening, settled into the pastor's guest room once again, Catherine found herself looking through old photo albums. One picture caught her eye, Sarah at age 5, sitting on Robert's shoulders at the farm in Vermont, both of them laughing as they fed carrots to the horses. She remembered Robert saying, "This place heals souls, Kathy. Something about the mountains, the silence. It reminds you what matters." Catherine closed the album, a decision crystallizing in her mind. "Eleanor," she called out. "Can you help me find some real estate listings?" "Real estate? What are you thinking?" "There's a small town near Margaret's farm. They need a receptionist at the medical clinic there." Catherine's voice grew stronger. "I can't follow Sarah to the farm. But maybe I can be close enough that when she's ready, if she's ever ready." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You'd leave Boston? Your whole life is here." "My whole life is wherever my daughter is," Catherine replied. "Even if she never speaks to me again, I need to be where she is." Robert's letter said we're all each other has. He was right. Spring bloomed into summer in the small Vermont town of Miller's Creek, population 2,743. Catherine's tiny rental house sat on a hill overlooking the valley where Margaret's farm sprawled in the distance. Each morning, she would sit on her porch with coffee, watching the sun rise over the mountains and knowing her daughter was somewhere out there, healing. The medical clinic where she worked was just busy enough to keep her mind occupied. The locals knew her story. News traveled fast in small towns, but they had their own way of handling it. No one mentioned the scandal directly, but elderly patients would often share stories of their own family reconciliations, their own journeys to forgiveness. "Took my Jimmy 15 years to speak to me again after I remarried," Mrs. Peterson told her one day while waiting for her appointment. "Now he brings my grandkids every Sunday for dinner. Catherine clung to these stories like lifelines. Some days, she would drive past Margaret's farm, careful to stay on the main road. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of Sarah, walking in the fields, helping with the horses, sitting on the front porch with her aunt. Summer turned to fall, and Catherine established her own quiet routines. She joined the local church, though she sat in the back. She volunteered at the town library. She planted a small garden, remembering how Sarah had always loved fresh tomatoes. Then one crisp October morning, the bell above the clinic door chimed. Catherine looked up from her paperwork and her heart stopped. Sarah stood there, thinner than before but with healthy color in her cheeks. She held Robert's watch in her hands. "The battery died," she said quietly. "Aunt Margaret said you might know where to get it fixed. Dad always said you were the only one he trusted with it." Catherine's hands trembled as she reached for the watch. "There's a jeweler in town. Mr. Henderson. He's good with old watches. Could you?" Sarah hesitated. "Could you take it to him? I want it done right." "Of course," Catherine whispered. "I'll take care of it." Sarah turned to leave, then paused. "I saw your garden. From the road. The tomatoes look good." "They're your father's variety," Catherine said. "The ones he always grew." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. He would have liked that. After she left, Catherine held the watch to her chest, breathing in the lingering scent of Margaret's farm, hay and horses and autumn leaves. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But like the slowly healing surgical scars they both carried, it was a sign that some wounds could mend with time. Christmas Eve dusted Miller's Creek with fresh snow. Catherine worked late at the clinic, organizing files for the upcoming year. She had volunteered for the holiday shift, knowing others had families to be with. The watch, repaired and polished, sat on her desk. She'd been waiting for the right moment to return it to Sarah, not wanting to push too hard, too fast. The clinic door chimed. Looking up, Catherine saw Sarah standing there in a red wool coat, snowflakes melting in her hair. "Aunt Margaret's having Christmas dinner tomorrow," Sarah said without preamble. "She asked me to invite you." Catherine's heart thundered. "Did she? Or did you?" Sarah looked down at her boots. "Both of us, I guess." She approached the desk slowly. "Is that Dad's watch?" "Yes. Mr. Henderson said it just needed a good cleaning. It's still keeping perfect time." Sarah picked it up, running her fingers over the familiar face. "Like Dad always said, some things are built to last, even when they break a little." The weight of the metaphor hung between them. "I've been reading his journals," Sarah continued. "The ones Pastor Mitchell gave me. Did you know he wrote about us every day?" Catherine nodded, unable to speak. "He wrote about how alike we are. How we both love too deeply, feel too much." Sarah's voice cracked. "How that makes us strong but also makes us vulnerable." "Sarah." "I'm not ready to forgive everything," Sarah interrupted. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready. But Dad also wrote about grace. About how love is bigger than our mistakes." She placed the watch back on the desk. "I've watched you, these past months. How you moved here but never intruded. How you kept your distance but stayed close enough if I needed you. That's what Mom would do," Dad wrote. "Love without demanding anything in return." Tears streamed down Catherine's face. "I would wait forever for you, baby." "I know," Sarah whispered. "That's why I'm here." She took a deep breath. "Dinner's at 2 tomorrow. Don't bring anything except maybe some of those tomatoes you canned. Dad's variety." Catherine nodded, afraid to speak, afraid to break this fragile moment. Sarah turned to leave, then stopped. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Merry Christmas." After Sarah left, Catherine sat in the quiet clinic, watching snow fall outside. She thought of Robert's words about hearts that know how to heal, about love being bigger than mistakes. She thought of the long road ahead, the difficult conversations, the painful memories, the slow rebuilding of trust. But for now, she had this moment. Her daughter had called her Mom again. Tomorrow, they would share a meal, pass the tomatoes Dad used to grow, and take one small step toward whatever future awaited them. Catherine picked up the watch, listening to its steady tick, a sound so like a heartbeat, so like hope.